Welcome to Learning to Listen. Step 6 is testing the source. How do you know who you're hearing? I'd like to start with a YouTube video that was shared by one of the members of the class. When I viewed it, I was taken by how on point this video was. Pause now to watch the YouTube video. Once you've watched it, we'll continue. The YouTube video talks about how imperative it is to learn the difference between God's voice and the other voices that are pulling us from the inside. God revealed that the purpose of the class that He had me design, even though all I was doing was following His lead, He's explaining parts of it to me now, was where that video left off, which was tuning your mind to perceive God. Tuning your mind to hear His voice. He told me that He carefully starts at the very beginning, leading through the Lord's Prayer and the source of Bible truth, so that people will take a step back and start to learn the heart of God and the purpose of prayer, and start to slow down and learn to quiet their spirit. It's a learning to tune themselves in to be ready to hear God's Spirit. And then when He speaks, we're ready to listen. I'm understanding the purpose of what He did building this class. And it's so exciting to not only see God do His thing and show up and it work, but for Him to start to reveal to me some of the reasons why what He built is working. How He's using it to reach people. In the last class, we covered discernment levels 1 through 2 and stopped midway through level 2, which was the fruits of the Spirit. God had me revise this presentation so that the words in the fruits of the Spirit compare and contrast were on target for what He wanted. He carefully chose them. He even told me why some of them. So let's go to discernment. The 3 levels of discernment are sensing God's presence, the fruit of the Spirit, and Bible truth. Let's start with sensing God's presence. So the first level of discernment is feeling God, or sensing His presence. I'm saying it's somewhat reliable, and we'll talk about why. But first I'm going to say it's because of our lack of training in perceiving it and discerning which is which. But God's presence will always accompany His message. To recognize God's presence, a couple helpful tips are: it'll feel warm and full of love, care, and acceptance. It feels like a warm embrace with the purest unconditional love. And it causes you to desire God's laws and to follow them, not to rebel against them or to compromise on them. The reason it's only somewhat reliable is because it takes practice to recognize God's presence, and that our desires and emotions can alter how we feel and how we perceive things. God's presence is the same. It doesn't change. But our ability to perceive it can change based on how badly we want something and how badly we might not want to do what God's asking us to do. The class struggled with this for a little bit, and I will share an example that seemed to clarify. I had an experience recently where I was using a realtor that I really liked, but it had been a very long time, and God said, I need you to change realtors. So I let the first realtor know that I needed to change realtors. We set everything up, and I had the next realtor all lined up and ready to go. Now, both realtors are believers in the Lord. So, hours after the previous listing had expired, and 30 minutes before the new realtor was going to come, I got a phone call from the first realtor that said, "There's people at the house right now. They want to see the house. Can I show it to them?" And I don't know. I don't know any of the laws. I don't know the implications. I knew that God had led me to switch realtors, and there was no hard feelings anywhere. So I told them I didn't know. But between contacting both realtors, the choice was not clear, and I needed God's guidance, but I wasn't getting it. So I called the first realtor back because we've prayed together before, and I told her, "I don't know what to do." She said, "Well, pray about it," which is exactly what I needed to be doing. And I had been praying about it off and on, but I was stressing. I knew I had to make a decision, and I knew what God had told me to do, but I knew I really wanted the first realtor to have a chance to sell the house. We'd been working together for a year now. And both of us were wondering if this was God's last shot for her, or if it was a distraction from the enemy. It could have been anything, and we didn't know, but we wanted it to work. So she said pray, and I did. And when I listened, I got nothing. Nothing. I didn't know what God was saying. I couldn't hear zip. And she wasn't getting any direction either. I tried 3 times and didn't hear anything. I couldn't hear anything. Well, that's not entirely true. I heard lots of things, but I couldn't hear God. I heard how much I didn't want to disappoint, frustrate, or put off the second realtor who had everything all set up and was literally driving to my house. I was thinking about how much I wanted the first realtor to sell the house, that I didn't want to disappoint the people who were standing there in front of the house waiting to look at it. I had lots of thoughts. They were all very loud and very urgent and competing and mutually exclusive. I couldn't do one and do the other. And I didn't know what decision to make, but those thoughts, those questions, those concerns, and the time limits where I only had a short period of time to make this decision because not deciding would be deciding also, just felt like a lot of pressure all at once. On top of that, I had a very important appointment that I had to leave for in only 30 minutes also. I literally had to do it now. And all of the pressure and all of the concerns and not being able to make everything come out the way I wanted no matter what choice I make, just had them cycling over and over, and they were very loud, and I could not hear God. So on the phone, I sat on the front porch, and I said, "Let's just be quiet." And so I sat there quietly and listened. And inside me, when I shushed all those inside voices and just said, "God, I just want you," and sought intimacy with him over all of my concern for everything else, I heard him. And his answer was, "Don't go with the first realtor, go with the second realtor. Don't worry. The people standing in front of the house won't work out anyway." I heard him. I let the first realtor know what God had said. I thanked her for everything, and then we moved on with the plan God had given me without being distracted anymore. Of course, I prayed for the first realtor after we hung up because I know that was a stressful situation and it was difficult for everyone involved. But the point here isn't the realtors or the realtors' feelings or me or my feelings. The point is deeper. The example was to show that God was present and had a will from the very beginning. He expected me to follow his plan and to seek him first. But I had so many competing concerns that were louder in my head, I heard nothing. Every time I came to him, I heard nothing. And it wasn't because he wasn't present. It wasn't because he wasn't in his message or that he didn't have guidance. It was because I needed to be still and put him first and quiet all the other things that I was worried about so that I just heard him. So, feeling God and sensing his presence will always be in his message. He is always there, ready to give you the answer, His answer, and fill you with His presence to confirm it. But we have to be still and put all of those other concerns and voices quiet so that He is first. Seeking communion and intimacy with Him is first, over everything else. And then we hear Him. And that can take practice. So keep practicing. Keep drawing close. And in the middle of the chaos, keep taking a moment to put everything else aside and just seek being one with your God. And He'll speak to you. But as you can see, my desire to make the first realtor work out and my emotions about not knowing which to do were getting in the way of me sensing and recognizing God's voice speaking to me. So keep practicing. Discernment level 2. The fruits of the Spirit. It's more reliable. Part of recognizing God's Spirit speaking to us is that it's always going to speak according to the fruits of the Spirit, the fruit that's listed in Galatians 5:22 through 23. Why is this true? Because God's going to speak according to the Bible, and He gave us a list of the good fruits that come from His Spirit working in people. So when His Spirit is working in you, it will be in accordance with the good fruit that He's listed, because the Bible is our truth. A couple little other indicators is it's not your own voice, and many times it's not what you want. We don't instinctively want obedience or what God has put in place. We want ease or comfort or things that are about us. It's part of the sinful nature that we've been born into at this point. So when God speaks life and His will and selflessness into us, many times it does not align with our initial desires. It often seems like it came out of nowhere, because it wasn't you being aligned with the Lord prior to you coming to Him for help. It brings peace even if the message is not what you want. And again, to reiterate, it coincides with the fruits of God's Spirit, because that's how the Bible reveals that God's Spirit works in us. So let's go through a couple elements of the fruits of the Spirit. The first fruit is love. We're going to compare and contrast God's good fruit and the enemy's bad fruit. God's good fruit of love is based in a selfless, perfect love, a servant leadership. The enemy's fruits are based in selfishness or accusations. He either accuses you or makes you feel like you deserve this and you deserve that, and makes it all about you instead of all about God and serving others. So the first fruit of love we're going to oppose with loathing, hate, and despising. I'm talking about God's perfect love, the selfless servant leadership love, loving others and loving their souls, where the enemy hates people, despises people, loathes people. That is not the feelings we should be having towards people. One of the class members brought up that it's not just about hating, despising, or loathing others, that the same rule applies to yourself. God doesn't permit us to hate, loathe, or despise ourselves, because He died for us just as much as He died for anyone else. He loves us tremendously. We were intentional. He designed us, and He loves us so much that Jesus paid the ultimate price so that we could be reunited with Him again. We used as an example, one of the people in class had a child who was struggling with loathing themselves when they did something wrong. They couldn't forgive themselves, they hated themselves. And when they prayed to the Lord over it, the Lord gave them a very specific message, but it's important for all of us to understand. And what God said is, if I forgive you, who are you to not forgive yourself? If I paid the ultimate price so that I had the option to forgive you, and chose to forgive you. Who are you to withhold forgiveness from yourself? When you do that, you are doing the job of the enemy. The enemy is our accuser, and it is not our job to go around accusing others or ourselves. Our job is to let God be in us and to be with God. That is what Jesus' sacrifice made possible, was to be with him again. And so, we are to allow God to do what he chose to do, to forgive us, and to choose to forgive ourselves, as God has given us the example of what to do, and not to take on the job of the enemy, but to rest in the peace and forgiveness that God brings. God's relationships are filled with love, and the enemy's viewpoint towards relationships moves towards loathing, hate, and actually despising things. The next fruit of God's Spirit is joy, versus the enemy's spirit of despair or apathy. Apathy is when you just don't care. He steals joy. Someone can be super excited about how amazing God working in their life is, where the enemy will just bring apathy. Not to care, not to notice, and to think it's stupid that other people care or notice, or childish. He'll bring despair, a different opposite from joy. Despair is hopeless, where the enemy will bring despair. When you pray, when you're listening for God's voice, God can bring joy despite the situation. We can feel sorrow and sadness. We can grieve that someone is struggling or we're struggling, but we won't despair because we know the Lord. When we put the situation in his hands, we trust him to continue guiding it. And we won't be apathetic. We will have the compassion that God gave us towards the situation. The question came up in class about feeling condemnation, as the enemy is the accuser. They said, but sometimes you feel condemned because you've done something wrong, and the enemy is not lying. So he might be telling you the truth. You did this and this and this, and it caused this and this and this, and you're feeling condemned and accused. And it does separate you from God. What then? What if the enemy's the one talking, but he's not lying? The truth is, the best lies are true, except for one little piece. It's true. You did that, and it does separate you from God. But the lie, that it's too late, or that you should still be feeling shame and despair over the situation. Whatever the enemy's feelings are, he's giving you towards it. Because when God gives you condemnation in prayer, he's calling you out, but he's drawing you close to him. When God calls you out and says, this needs to be fixed, he will call you close to him. He gives you a pathway back. He asks you to ask for forgiveness. If you, in that situation where the enemy is throwing things in your face from your past or present, have already asked God to forgive you and experienced his forgiveness, you are covered. If you have not, that's where you start. You say, Lord, forgive me for this thing. Be specific. Ask him if there's anything you need to do to make it right. Tell him you're sorry and give him the situation. Trust him. Do what he says. And trust that you're forgiven. Dwell in that forgiveness and let him fill you with his presence because you're no longer separated. Then, every time the enemy brings it back with all the feelings you've experienced before, you can shut it out. You can say, no, I've been forgiven. And you're not talking to him. You're talking to yourself and to the Lord. You say, Lord, I've been forgiven. You've cleaned me. And you start praising him. Thank you, Lord, for your grace, for your mercy, for your sacrifice on the cross that we can be one again. You sing your praise songs. You go to your special place. When Satan throws these things in your face and you are clean, you don't talk to him about it. You praise God for it and you talk over it. You kick it out and you ask God for help to stay in his spirit. You have victory over the enemy and his accusations because you have been forgiven. Another fruit of the Spirit is peace. God's Spirit brings peace. The enemy's spirit will bring bitterness, anxiety, fear, and rage. Whatever direction he thinks will work to take you away from peace, he'll try it. He'll try all of them, one of them, whatever. One of the classmates asked about anxiety. They said, but Jesus experienced anxiety clearly in the Garden of Gethsemane when he was praying for his Father in heaven to take away the horrible trial he was facing, knowing that he was going to have to die for our sins. In just a few hours, he was experiencing severe anxiety. So how can we call it a fruit of the enemy if Jesus experienced it and we know he never sinned? While I was writing this and looking through the list, I noticed that as the Lord was fixing the list of words, he left anxiety there. Well, having remembered the previous conversation that a classmate had asked about anxiety, I asked God, I said, you took all the words out that were confusing, but you've left anxiety here. And their example is right. Jesus was experiencing anxiety. Why is it here? And he answered me. He answered me clearly. He said, Jesus never experienced anxiety until the moment he began experiencing separation from me. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he was taking on the sins of the world. That had started, and God's presence had started to withdraw from him. And it was that absence of God's presence that was producing anxiety. And it is not sinning to experience anxiety in the absence of God's presence. It is appropriate for us to experience anxiety in the absence of God's presence because it is God's presence that gives us peace. So if we're in a situation and we're experiencing anxiety, it doesn't mean that we're sinning. It is an indication that we are not fully in God's presence to experience his peace, and that there is a better path forward. We can go through life experience anxiety about decisions, about struggles, about many things, but it is not required. We don't need to, and it is something the enemy tries to distract us with or steal God's peace from us. So if you're experiencing anxiety, there is a path without it, filled with God's peace, because God's presence brings peace. Draw close to him. Give him the situation. Give him whatever is causing the anxiety. Let him fill you with his peace, and trust him. Take the actions he told you to take, or don't take the actions he told you not to take. And as long as you trust him, that he has the situation, you will reside in his peace. Patience. God's Spirit brings patience, versus the enemy bringing panic and urgency without clarity. Of the several times I have misinterpreted God's voice when it wasn't, and it was a counterfeit from the enemy, it was with false urgency. The enemy created a situation and convinced me in my spirit and in my soul, kept pressuring urgency, urgency, urgency. But I had no clarity. I couldn't tell what direction to go. I didn't have peace that God was speaking to me, but it felt urgent to act, and the voice inside me kept leading me. You must do this, you must do this, you must do this, you have to do it right now. And when I took action, it wasn't God, which became clear. It was urgency without clarity, which starts to create panic. If you're experiencing urgency but don't have clarity from the Lord why you need to do it, or that it's him asking you to do it, it's not the Lord. It's false urgency. Urgency without clarity is from the enemy. And it leads to panic, which is also from the enemy. God will lead you to be patient and to have peace. We stopped our class here, and we will continue next time with more fruits of the Spirit. Until next time, God bless you all and continue practicing and listening.